Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Resurrection, Spiritual and Social Renewal. And I am your host, Dawud, with you. And this evening, we have a special guest that will be joining us. And actually, this guest was set to speak even prior to the wildfires that are unfortunately taking place on the West Coast. But the title of the day's talk is for this podcast is environmental justice and healing. And with us this evening for the conversation is a Latina American, a Muslim American who's involved in environmental justice advocacy and also does other things such as grows her own food naturally, involved in believes in food sovereignty, and we're going to get into some of that more. But without any further ado, I'd like to welcome my special guest for Resurrection Podcast, Emmalee Amán. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. How are you today?
I'm good. Alhamdulillah. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, why don't you tell the listenership a little bit about yourself before we dive into the topics?
Sure. So I've always had someone who's always had a really strong connection to the Creator through the creation and being outdoors. And through the creation, both people and planet, I really experience the beauty and the wisdom of the Creator through my connection with the earth and through my connection with other people, and doing a lot of deep listening within myself, deep listening to the earth, deep listening when I am, in conversation with other people. And so I have kind of a dual nature, if you will, which is such that I find a real need for balance between that quiet and going within and listening, or listening deeply to also what is around me, as well as being very active in advocacy work and specifically environmental justice work. I've really found that you can't do one without the other. And similarly, at least for me, I can't do one without the other. And I think this is really similar to, kind of the work that Angela Davis has done and how she presents it, that it's really necessary to do self-care work and community care work in order to continue for the long term to be able to do the justice work. And similarly, I've found that it's, for me, very necessary to do the work both from the grassroots and the grass tops. So I've been involved in environmental justice work for about the past 15 years. And I've been involved, just naturally practicing mindfulness and what I now as an adult would call meditation in the outdoors, probably since I was about 5 years old. So the vast majority of my life. And so I think the core of what I'm committed to is healing planet and people, which is, exactly what I decided to name my Instagram and also the YouTube channel that I have. And I try in those spaces to share some of the knowledge that I've gathered over the years, specifically related to environmental justice, related to growing your own food and medicine, and all that comes with being a good steward of the earth.
Yeah, and that's actually how I came across you, by the way, was via Instagram. And I looked at what you were doing and looked you up further before reaching out to you. So, and you mentioned your connection with nature. And if you don't mind elaborating on that a little bit more in terms of your spiritual practice as someone who's in touch with nature, also a Muslim, like what's the spiritual practice that you do that connects your soul with God's creation?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, probably since I was around 5 years old, was naturally very drawn to go by myself outdoors and spend a lot of time outdoors. I spent a lot of time outdoors with family as well, and like playing in the dirt. Was one of my favorite things as a kid, and still something I really love to do is play in the dirt. Working with soil and working with plants. It's just brings me such joy. And at the same time, since I was about 5 years old, I naturally felt very drawn to go by myself into the marshes and the woods and near the creeks near where I was living. And in particular for me, it was like a safe haven and a source of healing and strength, because our household was experiencing abuse when I was growing up. And so for me, getting out of the house and going to, this place in the woods and in the marshes, that was just so calm and quiet. It was incredibly healing. So I would, walk out there and walk for a little while and then find a log to sit on, and I would just breathe very deeply and start to get calm and get centered. And I would observe everything that was around me. So, listening to the sound of the creek flowing by and the sound of the birds singing and the smell of the leaves that were beneath my feet, and observing like the beauty of the way that the sunlight filters through the leaves that are overhead above you, and watching the way that sunlight sparkles on water, and just observing everything with all of my senses and breathing very deeply. And then I would just talk to God. And that just no one ever told me that there was a God. It's something that, or a creator, that was something that's very inherent for me, and just something I always knew. And no one ever told me to do these kind of practices either. It's just something that came very naturally for me. And I just have continued with those practices throughout the rest of my whole life. And it's still something that I do on a regular basis, is, going out to the woods and deeply observing everything that's going on around me, and breathing, and, just having a conversation with the creator, and going inside and getting connected, reconnected to that wisdom, and recognizing, there's that energy, and recognizing that interconnectedness that exists between absolutely everything that's in the creation, the interconnectedness between the creator and human beings and soil and plants and water and rocks and absolutely everything that is within the universe. When you really that deep listening, when you do that deep listening, you can feel it and you get connected into it. And just being in that stream is so healing. I find it such a healing process. And I think that's what I was referring to earlier, as far as that balance between being and doing.
Well, one thing that you mentioned that really resonates with me, and I experienced it when I moved to Detroit. So I grew up in a semi-rural area in Central Virginia, and I'm one of those guys that used to ride on the dirt bike trail and go down by the creek, and we used to capture tadpoles and things like that. And grandfather had a huge field of growing all sorts of things. And if I want some fruit, I go to the tree and pick like a pear off the tree, right? So I grew up in that kind of environment, and I came up here, and what I realized is that people just seem so much more calm down there than here. And I think that part of it, I mean, it's the rat race of city life, but I also think that there's something very healing about being in God's creation and being around nature, and how that helps connect us with our humanity and the divine. And we are stripped of that when we live in these concrete jungles and we don't see fruit, we barely see trees. And especially in a town like Detroit, that is a factory town, I think just being exposed to iron and steel and concrete does something very dehumanizing to the soul. And so I think you really have to recharge and go out to nature and reconnect with God's creation, that we can actually be in contact with our primordial good human nature, or as we say, fitra, to connect us back with our Creator.
Yeah, and that actually really highlights also the importance of urban tree canopy and urban parks. And I think especially this year during COVID, it's something that has been even more highlighted than what people had realized previously, is the importance of local parks and even pocket parks. You know, that with so many of us staying very close to home and working from home, or, you know, when we were actually in like stay-at-home orders, that really the only places that we were able to go out for recreation, for exercise, for enjoyment, just for relief from being only in one place, is one of the few places is, you know, those local parks that are really close to your home, and especially the ones that are within walking distance. And people have really rediscovered the importance of our local parks and our local green spaces. And, you know, having the urban tree canopy, everyone should have access to natural spaces because it is very healing. There are plenty of scientific studies that have shown that there's great healing when people spend time in areas that are green, like the green effect. And then there's also the blue effect of being in spaces that are near to water. So for example, like the added healing impact of, for example, walking on a wooded trail that's next to a river or next to a creek is even increased. And this really highlights the importance of advocating and funding programs that make sure that there's sufficient funding and that there are sufficient green spaces. And then from the environmental justice standpoint, it's really important for us to understand that everyone doesn't have the same access to the outdoors, either in terms
of reading my mind.
Yeah, everyone does not have the same access to the outdoors. And that comes up in a variety of different ways. First of all, it has to do with your zip code. So environmental justice looks at, you know, where is the disproportionate impact of environmental bads and where is the disproportionate lack of environmental goods. In the United States of America, your zip code is the number one thing that determines the quality of your health. And specifically around environmental justice, if you are a person of color or low income, but particularly if you're a person of color, which is actually statistically even more likely of a factor in relation to environmental bads, you know, your environmental justice looks at, again, like the disproportionate distribution of environmental bads towards Black, Indigenous, people of color communities and low-income communities, and the disproportionate number of environmental goods in communities that are largely Black, Indigenous, people of color and or income. So unfortunately, you know, if you don't have as high of an income, you're less likely to live near a public green space. And that's a reality of the inheritance of racial and socioeconomic injustice in the United States of America.
Yeah, for sure. We have something, just to highlight, for example, in Detroit, we have the most polluted zip code in Detroit area. I mean, regarding the state of Michigan, it's the most polluted, one particular zip code. It's actually the district that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the first Congress woman from the state of Michigan, she represents that district. It's in Southwest Detroit. It's predominantly Puerto Rican American, Mexican American, along with Yemeni Americans. There's also a number of poor white folks and poor black folks who weren't able to have the economic mobility to move away. And there's two things that are very interesting about that zip code, or problematic, I should say, not interesting in a good way. One, you mentioned this lack of green space, where there isn't a lot of this environmentally friendly green space. But the second is its proximity to plants that let off high emissions. So you have the Rouge plant, which is a Ford, with the foundry, which I thought also pollutants. And then it's also the Marathon Gas Company refinery, which refines the gas in this area. So all of this is like in this one area.
Yeah.
And it's no mistake that right next to there in South Dearborn is the highest rates of asthma in the state of Michigan. I actually got a video sent to me yesterday from one of the board members of the mosque that's in that polluted zip code. Brother Mahdi sent me a video of just like this plume of like hellish looking smoke. It looked like regular smoke. It was like orange, almost fiery looking smoke that was coming out and just polluting the area in this new sort of like factory space that they never saw before. So I'm just kind of like putting an exclamation point on this issue of zip code, poverty, and then the likelihood of being there more environmental injustice of corporate entities basically set up right there where people don't have as much. I mean, there's no it's no accident why in the richest county in the state, Oakland County, also has cleaner air, and there's no factories in that area, the more wealthy zip code in comparison to Southwest Detroit. You said something I wanted to pivot to, because you mentioned, as your youth and mashallah, you were connected to your good God-given nature just to walk out into nature and contemplate creation and do your own prayers at a young age without even being taught. But I think this is part of your life experience that influenced you getting involved in being an environmental justice advocate. So if you could kind of like expound upon that a little more, because you said that in your home, in the area that you were living in, that there was abuse, and you weren't referring to abuse inside of the home. It's not like you were referring to outside abuse, like abusing your home or abusing your community. So can you like expound on that a little more?
Sure. So when I was referring to like the abuse that I experienced in my childhood, that was, from a father figure in the home.
Okay, sorry about that.
But, so I was born in Florida, and I was in Florida when I was little. And then we moved to an area outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, where my mother is from.
Okay.
And, my mom was a single mom, a special education public school teacher with 3 kids. And so the place where we could afford to buy a house was actually in an area quite similar to what you were describing in the area of Detroit that Rashida Tlaib represents earlier. When you were talking, I was just like, oh, this all sounds like a very familiar story, because it's basically, the same as the place where we moved to when we moved to Ohio, which is that it's a sacrifice zone. Both of those places, like they're what's referred to as a sacrifice zone, because unfortunately,
an actual term in environmental justice.
It's an actual term. It's an academic term. It's a term that we use in the environmental justice community as a sacrifice zone.
Wow.
And it's reflective of the fact that unfortunately in the United States of America, we have a culture of disposability. We have a culture of disposable things. We have a culture of disposable places, and we have a culture of disposable people. That's the way that this society behaves. It's an unfortunate reality that needs to be changed. So a sacrifice zone is, typically, it's almost always a low-income area. It is typically also an area where there are large numbers of Black, Indigenous people of color. And it's an area that has a concentration of polluting industries. So the primary characteristic is that it's an area with a concentration of polluting industries. So the area where we could afford to buy a house was in an area that eventually we found out had a Monsanto plastics plant that was polluting the river, that was the drinking water source, a Chevron oil refinery that had been shut down, but was never actually cleaned up before it was shut down. And it was polluting the air, the soil, the water, near where we lived and where I had extended family living. We also had a trash incinerator and that was close by, and we had like the county's actual, dump. It was called the Rumpke dump. And, just it's where everybody's waste goes. And then it was a semi-rural area. And so we sometimes also had pesticide drift. So there's this was in a very small area. Additionally, most of Ohio is flat. However, when you get down to Cincinnati, it's very, very hilly. Yeah. So when you have that hilliness, the pollution really gets trapped in the valleys. And so there were just, extreme rates of disease. Like I had very severe asthma. My brother had very severe asthma when we were kids. A lot of our cousins and friends and, people in the community had very severe asthma. There are extremely high rates of cancer. In fact, I didn't know it at the time, but when I went to college, I actually found out that area of Cincinnati has 70% higher rates of cancer than the rest of the state, and was actually nicknamed Cancer Valley. So those are fun things to find out about a place after you've left.
That zip code, if you could tell me the racial and ethnic demographics of that zip code just quickly before you continue. I'm curious.
That particular zip code was very low income, like working class and working poor Black folks and African American folks, and like a very small handful of Latinos. But yeah, very definitely a very low income area of to the west of the city. And
basically primarily affecting Black and brown folk.
In this particular case, it was a mix of folks ethnically who were being impacted.
Okay.
In most cases of environmental injustice and sacrifice zones, if there is a statistical tendency for it to be, areas that have heavier concentrations of people of color. In this particular instance, I would say probably actually the majority of the community was, very poor white folks. And then the second biggest majority being very poor African American folks, and then very poor Latinos in that particular area. But what's common among any frontline environmental justice community is that you don't have the resources to fight back as much. You don't have as much of the resources, the time, the money, the expertise, the connections to be able to fight back against the siting of all of these polluting industries near where you live, where you work, where you play, where you pray. It's exactly what you were describing earlier, again, with Detroit, that, you know, the communities that are wealthier, you don't see the concentration of polluting industries where they are. Why? Because they have the time, they have the money, they have the resources, and they have the connections to say not in my backyard, and to say not in my backyard in a way that's actually effective, because you have the time, the money, the connections. And so although at the time that I was growing up in that area, I was not aware of statistically just how bad the impact of all of these polluting industries was, we knew it in our bodies. You know, you feel that viscerally in your body. And you know, I started observing how, you know, all of these health impacts were happening, you know, for me, for my brother, for my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my friends, other members of the community, and just started kind of taking people's stories and talking to people. And more people started getting together and sharing with each other in the community about, you know, this community member has this type of cancer, this community member has that type of cancer, this community member has this endocrine disorder, these number of community members have, you know, chronic asthma. Like, here's all of the different types of health problems that are showing up for people in the community. And we all realize there's something very seriously wrong going on here. And we were aware of, you know, like, here's all of the pollution that's going on in our community as well. And so we decided, we're like, you know, we can't just take this lying down. We've got to figure out something that we can do. So what we started to do is that myself and one particular cousin of mine, we started doing a lot of organizing in the community, like getting the community, like, first of all, just gathering the community together and having people share their stories with each other so that everybody knows not just what's going on with them, but what's going on with other people in the community. And then, you know, starting to get, you know, much more organized in the sense of, you know, figuring out which polluting industries were most likely causing us the worst of the problems. So we identified the Monsanto plastics plant, which was directly across the street from the school. Oh, and actually another source of pollution there was US Route 50, which was actually the road that was divided between the elementary school and the Monsanto plastics plant. And of course, it was like, there's tons of pollution from off of all the trucks and the cars going up and down US 50 as well. Yeah. And so that was one of them that we really decided was one of the major polluters. And then one of the other major pollution sources was that Chevron oil refinery that had never been cleaned up before it was shut down. And so we started, I was at that point in the YMCA Youth in City Government program. And so I was learning a lot about, you know, how government works, and had already actually started like setting connections through that program with elected officials. And so, you know, we started researching and figuring out, like, okay, like, what does it take to actually get a meeting with the elected officials for this area? What does it, and, you know, how do you actually run one of those meetings? How do we write letters to our elected officials and share our stories about these are the real life impacts of what's going on for my health, for my family's health, for my community's health because of these polluting industries? You know, we started looking into the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. You know, how do we hold these industries accountable to those laws? How do we get meetings set up and conduct those meetings with our regional EPA offices and all those sorts of things? And so yeah, we got organized, we got active, we were working in the community, and, you know, step by step, you figure it out. And so we did have, eventually we did have one major win, which was that we were actually able to get that Monsanto plastics plant shut down because it was producing pollution into the water, which was beyond what was allowed by the Clean Water Act. Unfortunately, later, another company just came and bought, a few years later, another company came and bought the same factory and reopened it. So it's not like that plant was ever permanently shut down. But as far as I'm aware, the new company that's running it is much more careful about making sure to actually follow the regulations now. And then from my perspective, the bigger picture win of everything that we were doing there was actually the fact that as a community, we learned how to advocate for ourselves. And you never forget that kind of knowledge. You know, no matter what the particular wins are, the biggest win that any frontline environmental justice community or any person who, you know, wants to work toward environmental justice can have is actually to learn the skills that are needed to advocate for yourself. And that's what I am most passionate about in my environmental justice work, is actually providing to other people the tools that they need in order to effectively advocate for themselves and their families and their communities, because that's something that stays with you forever, and you can use it in around a whole variety of different topics, not just environmental justice topics, but anything that really matters to you. You know, once you know how to be an effective advocate, you can advocate for anything that really matters to you. And those people who are in the frontline environmental justice communities, they are the experts. You know, they're in their community every single day. They know what it is that's going on in their community. They know what they need. They have the best solutions to suggest. And, you know, what they need is support. What folks in frontline environmental justice community needs is support. They need financial support. You know, frontline environmental justice communities and organizations need financial support. You know, sharing your it's basically, you know, time, talent, treasure, right? Just what lots of nonprofits ask for: your time, your talent, your treasure.
Yeah.
So if you have money available to spare to donate it, please, directly to frontline environmental justice organizations or organizations that focus on environmental justice issues. If you have talent that can be helpful to that community, ask them if they'd like it, offer it no strings attached. And, you know, same with the time, you know, that if you have time to give, ask from the community, what do they need?
Question for you. You're talking about the importance of community organizing and dealing with these issues. And it's like right now, there's a Amira just sent a message talking about the issues of environmental awareness that's needed regarding the forest fires that are taking place there. And there's an issue of mass pollution that's going on right there. And I'm just wondering, do you offer training to communities if they call out, or if they, like, if someone contacts you, for instance, let's say a community organization or a mosque reaches out to you, is there some way that you can kind of give them like a environmental justice intensive, or give them like a environmental community organizing training, like online? Like, are you available to do something like that?
So in the past, I was running my own environmental advocacy consulting business. And one of the things that I was often doing was actually providing environmental advocacy trainings. So it's something that I have done before in the past. In the past, I have only done those in person. I don't have experience as of yet with running those types of trainings online. However, it is something that I've been looking into, and it's something that I've actually been talking with colleagues about, trying to get their assistance because I'm not the most tech savvy person.
Neither am I.
Yeah, so I think people, because of my age, people tend to assume that I'm automatically going to be tech savvy, and that's actually my professional weak point. But I have been actually speaking with some colleagues of mine to find out, who are more tech savvy than me, to find out whether or not I could, do some partnerships and get support from other folks in order to figure out what would be an appropriate way to transition from in-person to online, the types of environmental advocacy trainings that I have done in the past. And some of those I would like to be able to get them funded by a nonprofit, for example. In the past, occasionally when there's, someone that I know personally from a frontline, specifically frontline environmental justice community, because that's something that's really, and low income, so that's something that's really close to my heart. I have occasionally done like pro bono trainings for, particular communities. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult balance to strike between, I definitely like to give back and take care of others, and then also needing to take care of myself. So I am definitely interested in looking into whether or not I could start to do environmental advocacy and environmental justice trainings online. And it's a question of capacity and, doing that in partnership with some of the colleagues I've been talking to who might be able to provide the technical support.
Okay, so, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but I'm going to say something, giving you a plug, and it's completely unsolicited, right? So for people who are listening to this or watching this live right now or listen to it later, that if you have a interest in learning more and having a potential training, to reach out to Sister Emmalee Amán. And she has a LinkedIn page. You can also find her on Facebook and contact her. And we, as varying communities, so like we all have different intersections of our identity. So you're Latina, and you're also Muslim. And I'm saying this specifically for the faith community, that we have to get out of this mindset of what I call free sabilillah, not fi sabilillah, free sabilillah. And what I mean by that is we have someone who's an expert, and then their livelihood is based upon this expertise that we have. But because they're part of our community, we want to call them and have them do all of these workshops and take all this time, and people put together trainings, spend a lot of time reading, staying educated, and then our only compensation to them is saying Jazakallahu khairan. And really, yes, tell someone, may Allah reward you, but also at the same period of time that we spend and put our money upon that which we value, right? So we can't expect people to have specific expertise. And really, in our community, there are a lot of racial justice, or let me say a lot. There are more people who are involved in anti-Islamophobia activism or racial justice activism regarding police accountability, for instance, and things like this. But there are not that many people in our community who experientially and professionally are involved in environmental justice. So look the sister up, and when you look the sister up to do a training for your community organization or for a mosque, make sure that you have something budgeted to compensate her for her time. And she's not saying that. I'm saying that. Also, maybe I could help you as well, and I've gotten some help. But I was teaching my book Towards Sacred Activism, and I was doing this in person. Firstly, I went to Mississauga with Seekers with Sheikh Faraz Rabbani. We did the launch there. and then I went into Western Province of Canada. We did something here locally with Beacon Institute here in Michigan, teaching the class in like a 8 session course. But since COVID-19 has us locked down, I actually took those classes, and now I have them on PowerPoint presentations that can be given like via Zoom. And so like after a little bit of stumbling, I've been able to figure out like how to do these classes and kind of adapt things more to the style of teaching online. So I highly suggest that you take your skills and your breadth of knowledge, and I've learned from you this evening, um, to take what you have and do it online, because only God knows how much longer this situation is going to be where we're not able to fly to different communities and give trainings. I don't believe 45 in the Oval Office is going to be a vaccine soon. It may be 2, even 3 years. So this may be the new normal for us for a while. Only God knows. But just a suggestion from me to you.
Yes, I mean, that's the intention. And, it's, I do appreciate what you said, because, the thing is, after having done all of that environmental justice, community organizing as a teenager, that was part of what really made me decide to go and pursue a BA/MA in environmental policy. And I do have plenty of student loan debt that needs to be paid back, unfortunately, because university is expensive.
Especially grad school.
Yeah, grad school. I mean, I saved a little bit of money doing BA/MA specifically because I had a grant for my bachelor's. And so, like one semester of classes that I was taking both towards my bachelor, that counted both towards my bachelor's and my master's simultaneously, were covered by my grant that was for my undergrad program. But yeah, you don't get grants for the rest of the master's program.
Right.
Yeah, but I think, one of the things that's really important, probably what I would say is the most important to remember when it comes to environmental justice, is it's the core. It's really about the golden rule. Do you treat others how you want to be treated? Do you want for other people what you want for yourself? Do you work toward getting for other people what you want for yourself? So do you, think about for yourself, do you want polluting industries in your neighborhood that are going to have a negative impact on you? No. Do you want positive environmental benefits that are going to have a positive effect on you and your family and your community? Yes. So then, work to make sure that those environmental negatives are not harming anyone else, and that those environmental benefits are available for everyone else, and that there's much more equal distribution in this country of the environmental bads and the environmental goods.
Okay, so excuse me. I just switched to a different segment of our conversation, because we've kind of talked about environmental justice and what happened at a very young age for you and what you experienced in Cincinnati, and then now your academic endeavors, which has led you to being a consultant. Besides you previously being an organizer, but still organizing around environmental justice. But now I also know that you are into growing your own food, like natural food, and you're a believer in food sovereignty. I actually am as well, and uh, also agroecology. So I'd like to you to kind of elaborate on this issue of not just the issue of eating like good, healthy food that's grown ourselves, right? That's healthy food, but besides the physical benefits, but also the the connection between eating this way and our spiritual well-being. Because one thing I find, especially in American society, and I say in the West in general, that we've moved towards this type of um, understanding where we separate the body from the soul, as if
Mhm.
they're not like interconnected, as if our souls don't have an effect on our physical health, and then likewise, our physical health and what we consume can actually have an effect on our spiritual state, right? So I'd like for you to kind of like elaborate upon that some, because I have some ideas myself, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure. I mean, I would say that it's one of the, I would say is one of the main ills of U.S. culture, is that it does tend to create so much separation. You know, there's separation and there's hierarchy. It's ego-centric rather than eco-centric, you could say. And I actually have, I wish I had the graphic with me right now that I could just put up.
From egocentric to ecocentric.
Right. From,
Okay. I like that. Can I borrow that?
Sure.
I'll give you attribution.
There's a really excellent and famous visual that goes with that, and it really shows how in the ego. Sorry, I don't know where to put my hands. In the egocentric, everything is sort of like a pyramid, right? And so you have like a white cisgender man at the top, and like women would be beneath men, and beneath humans is like cats and dogs and cows, and beneath that is, you know, trees, and beneath that is things like soil and fungi and what have you. And that's where it's, you know, it's egocentric because it's about hierarchy. And in contrast, the image that is for ecocentric, it's a circle where you see that everything in it is equal and is within an ecosystem, and that we're all part of the creation, and it's all important. It all matters, and it's all connected. So we really need to have that shift back to the understanding of what is the deeper reality, which is that all of us as human beings are connected, and all of us are connected with everything that's on the face of this planet. You know, we are water, we are soil, we are fungi. You know, our bodies are made up of majority water and of soil and minerals, and actually fungi and bacteria are a big part of our bodies as well. And you know, we this is our home. It's what we rely upon, and it is part of us. And we have to stop coming from that mindset of separation, and instead understand the interconnectivity, and that, you know, from my perspective and from the perspective of many of the world's major religions, human beings were put here to be stewards, you know, not to be overseers and not to be extractors, but to be stewards of what actually belongs to the Creator. We are here supposed to be caregivers, to be healers of planet and of the people. And for me, a lot of those lessons I have gained from working with soil and growing food, and working with soil and growing food in community in particular. I grew up growing, you know, some vegetables in the backyard with my grandfather. But when, you know, when we moved and we were so poor, we were often like eating canned food or frozen food, and I knew how to grow tomates, in the backyard, and that was it. I had never grown anything else as a kid, and I didn't have the skills that I have now. Like we actually, we had a pretty good sized yard. I could have been growing a lot of food as a teenager if I had had the skills back then that I have now. I could have been supplementing, our family's nutrition. I could have been growing really, nutritious food for us. And, my love for digging in the dirt and my love for working with soil and, the history of both of my grandfathers having been farmers and just growing those tomatoes in the backyard with my grandpa, it really left an impression on me. And I think, so when I started learning how to grow my own food and how to grow my own food naturally, it was incredibly empowering. It is so empowering to have food sovereignty. Even at times, there was a time during college and shortly after college as well that I was extremely food insecure and, skipping meals multiple times a day because of financial difficulties. But I got involved with community gardening and, then through a combination of like getting food assistance from the food banks and, being on the SNAP program, was formerly called the Food Stamp program, now the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance program, and, doing community gardening and growing food myself, I was able not only to, supplement my food and have access to really healthy food, but also to have control over what I was growing and to start developing those skills of knowing how to feed myself, which was incredibly empowering. And I began with working with the earth, having this relationship, this working relationship, which was different. It's different having a working relationship with the land versus what I had been doing up to that point, which was more, going out to the woods and walking and meditating, which is a beautiful relationship. And yet I gained so much more spiritually from this beautiful, like, working relationship with the land, because it started to teach me the spiritual lessons in the physical work. I started learning that, when I gave to the soil would give back to me. I learned that reciprocity from working with the earth and working with plants, working with food plants, working with medicine plants. I would take good care of the soil and give to the soil, or I would plant a seed and pray on it, and then you have to come and water the seed consistently every day, for, depending on which kind of seed, it might be 5 days or 7 days or 10 days or 14 days. And you learn that patience and that persistence and that faith and that caregiving, that you don't see the result right away, but you keep watering the seed until it sprouts. And then you keep caring for it, and you keep caring for it, and you keep caring for it. And eventually it gives you the fruits, and it feeds you and gives you, like, you had already given so much energy to the soil and to the seed and to the plant. And then it gives that energy back to you. And with that energy that you have, you can again give back to the soil. And another one of the really deep lessons that I learned from, growing food and community gardening and, working at a community farm, at a point when I was going through very, very dark time in my life, I remember planting a seed and watering it and taking care of it and seeing it sprout, and then reflecting on that process. And I did this piece of art that helped me reflect on and realize that I too am like a seed. You know, we too are like seeds in the hands of the Creator. And that when I was in that dark place, I was not put there as punishment. That dark place was like being a seed planted beneath the soil. That it was dark and it was lonely and it was difficult, but I was put there out of love. And that the whole time I was there, Creator was there, you know, watering me every day, praying for me every day, waiting for me. What the seed has to do beneath the soil, it literally breaks its own shell. It has to break its own seed coat. And after it's done that, it has to push its way up above the soil. And that made me realize that that was what I was in the process of as well. That I had been placed not out of punishment, but out of love in a very dark place in my life, like that seed being beneath the soil, but that God was always with me. Allah was always with me the whole time, watering me, praying for me, waiting for me to break that shell and to sprout and to come above the soil. And that even when I, you know, when the seed has just sprouted above the soil, it's very delicate. It's very delicate. But, you know, the gardener, the capital G, is always there. You know, a gardener who is a good gardener, a good steward, is very attentive and loving and, you know, coming every day and giving whatever care that the seed or the seedling or the plant needs at that particular time. And I realized that lesson only through that working relationship with the land of growing my own food and being very observant with it and being in that meditative state with it and, you know, living in reciprocity with, you know, the soil and the plants and everything that was there in that ecosystem, and realizing that I am part of it as well. We're all in this interconnected whole.
Thank you for painting that picture for me. You actually had me think about a verse in the Holy Quran where it says that God strikes a parable to a good word being like a good tree, which roots go down firmly into the ground and then sprouts up and trees reach up to the heavens. And what's beautiful about that, and you mentioned about the growth of the seed, is that as the tree is growing upwards and it can be seen growing up from breaking the soil, what people don't see is that the roots are all going down simultaneously at the same time. And that, and Ibn Abbas, may God be pleased with him, said that this likeness was like a date palm tree. So that's kind of like paints the picture, which the fruits of the date palm tree, and the palm itself has many benefits, not just for human beings eating, but for shade and for insects. So it's a benefit not just for the soil there or for human beings in multiple fashions, but even for wildlife that there. So thank you for sharing that. I have one other question for you before we close, because you mentioned about growing medicinal plants and medicinal herbs. So I'm just curious, like, what have you grown this year as far as like uh, medicinal plants or herbs that you could share with us?
Sure. So I've grown echinacea, which is actually native to the United States or North America, I should say, or Turtle Island, even. And it's really helpful for actually boosting your immune system. And at this point, I think many people are familiar with echinacea. But folks don't always know about echinacea. Sometimes they think that you have to dig up the roots in order to use it medicinally. But the reality is that the leaves and the flowers and the pods of echinacea all have medicinal use. So you don't actually have to dig up the roots of your echinacea in order to get the medicinal benefits of it. Any part of the plant, you can harvest it, wash it, dry it, and use it as a tea that is good for your immune system. I also have lemon balm, which again, you would harvest, wash, and dry, and then drink it as a tea, or you can use it fresh and drink it as a tea. You just would need significantly larger amount if it's fresh than if it's dry. And lemon balm is, if you just need a little bit of something to help you fall asleep and not something too strong, lemon balm is really, I know for me, it works pretty well in making me sleepy and helping me go to sleep. It's also considered as something that's sort of slightly anti-anxiety and soothing. I have peppermint, which is really good for headaches, again, as tea, or even just touching the leaves and smelling the essential oils can help with headaches. Or
I use peppermint for that purpose too.
Yeah, it's quite helpful. Just touching the leaves and from the smell that's on your fingers, smelling it can be quite helpful for headaches. Or you can also make it into a tea and drink that, and can be helpful for headaches or for stomach ache. Let me see what else. I have, I'm actually like I'm a very visual learner, so I'm visualizing my plants in my head and where they're located. I have calendula, which is another flower that, unlike other herbs, actually, so most herbs you would harvest them earlier in the morning. But calendula, what you're actually looking for is the resin. And so this one, you actually need to wait until like much later in the morning or the early afternoon. You want all of the dew to be dried off, but you don't want the resin to have been burned off by the sun yet. So like 11:30 is a good time to harvest it. And then you dry it, and the resin of calendula is really good for soothing like itchiness or wounds. You can also make a tea out that you would drink out of calendula, and it's really good during the winter time because it's a plant that sort of captures the energy of the sun. What else do I have going on this year? Oh, I have tulsi, which is sometimes referred to as holy basil. It's that one actually you have.
Is that like Tulsi Gabbard, the politician?
No.
The same. I was wondering.
No.
I was wondering if her name meant holy basil. I don't know. I didn't know. Anyway.
No, Tulsi is what it's called in India. The plant is from India, from the Asian subcontinent. So it's sometimes in the West referred to as holy basil, but in South Asia, it's usually called tulsi. And
her name is Indian, I think. She's a Hindu convert.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know her religion. But yeah, tulsi is also really excellent for boosting the immune system, and it's an adaptogen. It's one of few like true adaptogens. Adaptogenic plants means that they help your body deal with periods of acute stress. And so other adaptogenic plants would include like reishi and chaga mushrooms. But tulsi is much more affordable and easier to grow among the adaptogens. You do have to be careful with Tulsi that you do not want to eat it raw, because it's so high in minerals that it can actually damage the enamel of your teeth. So you want to do, it does like accumulate the minerals in its body, which is part of what makes it really good medicine when you're drying it and drinking it as a tea. So strong in those when it's raw that can damage the enamel of your teeth. Another plant that I have that actually like sends its roots down quite far and brings minerals up into its leaves is borage. And borage you can actually harvest and use both the leaves and the flowers. It has very beautiful blue star-shaped flowers that you could harvest and dry and make into a tea, and it's known to be like very heart-soothing and calming and sedative. Or you and actually or not or but and you can harvest the leaves of borage, which have actually a cucumber-like taste, and is very rich in minerals because the roots of the plant go down and actually gather the minerals from the soil. And the leaves have like prickliness to them, which, to make it some less unpleasant, if I'm going to eat it raw, I'll actually sort of roll it up like how you would roll tobacco for a cigar, and crunch on it. If that's still uncomfortable, like uncomfortable feeling in your mouth, then what I tend to do with them is actually with the leaves of borage. In the summer, they're really nice to make like an icy drink. So I'll put a little bit of water, some lime, and in a blender. I put like a little bit of water, squeeze an entire lime in there, cut up a cucumber and put it in, and put the borage leaves and also some mint leaves is nice as well. And then just blend up that whole thing. And, if you want it more cold, you could also add ice. And you just have like a nice blended cold drink that's very refreshing on a hot day, and also has, it's very hydrating and has the medicinal qualities of the borage and the mint. This year in particular, I think, actually I do have, I have thyme, which can actually, in addition to its culinary uses, can be used medicinally, in particular for asthma and other respiratory upsets. Again, you can just take it fresh or take it dried and make it into a tea. And you would also inhale some of that tea, being careful, of course, that it's not too hot when you're inhaling it. But it's really good for inhaling, can help, like both the heat of the steam and also the oils that are coming from the thyme can help open the respiratory passages.
Yeah, when I'm getting a cold, like I'm getting a cold, I'll go to Dearborn.
Imam Dawud, you froze.
Yeah, sorry about that. I said that when I'm getting a cold, I will go to Dearborn and get za'atar, which is like thyme that they have on the bread to eat it. Or I feel like I'm catching a cold, and it helps me with the with mucus and it helps me out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, the medicine that plants offer us, and it's just really beautiful. I also have lavender, which is of course great just for smelling it and enjoying the flowers. And part of what's beautiful about plants is that they're often both like body medicine and our heart medicine at the same time. That they have their sort of purely physical medicinal qualities, but they have that heart medicine quality to them too. And especially when you have that relationship with the plants that you're working with. And so actually in terms of like community herbalism, it's really encouraged for people not only to use certain medicinal plants, but also to cultivate a relationship with the plants that you are working with on a regular basis, and so even if you live in a city and you only have a small balcony, try to keep, if you like to, try to keep a few plants in containers on your balcony, so you have a little bit of green space where you are, and you can build that relationship with the plants and enjoy that time with them. And sometimes even if you listen to the plants, they'll actually tell you instinctively, like you'll get a feeling. They'll tell you what kind of medicine that they have for you, or they'll tell you what they need. It sounds a little bit crazy to some folks, especially if you're not a plant person. But it's really, again, like that practice of the deep listening, and kind of listening through your heart, listening to people, and using your what's sometimes referred to as your intuition, but in a way could be referred to as it's like your spiritual senses. That we have the 5 senses of the body, but you have your spiritual senses as well. And especially the more that you use them, the more that you cultivate them, they become more fine-tuned. And you can use them in the relationship that you have with plants and the relationship that you have with people, like really listening from your heart to what your plants need, really listening from your heart to what other people you're interacting with need.
Mm-hmm. No, I believe that 100%. I have no doubt about what you're saying at all in regards to that. So we're going to wrap this up. For those who are the viewers or listeners, if you have any other further questions or would like to solicit the assistance for a workshop, and especially if you are offering some sort of honorarium, I highly recommend for you to go on the Facebook page and look up Emmalee Amán, or to check her out on LinkedIn. And we'll be sharing those links on Resurrection Podcast Facebook page, as well as we'll add them on YouTube as well. In conclusion, please leave us with a word of spiritual wisdom, if you don't mind. It can be something that you picked up. I know I put you on the spot. It could be something that you learned across the years of dealing with nature. It could be something that you learned from your sheikh or your spiritual guide on the path. You can share something with us.
I think what's coming for me is that the process of the healing of the land and the healing of the people is all interconnected, that it's all one process. And that's really where I come from with my work, that the healing of planet and the healing of people they're inseparable. And that's the way that we have to approach it, that, when you go through the process of healing the land, you're also doing a process of healing yourself, because we are part of this earth. When you go through a process of contributing towards healing others, you are also contributing towards healing yourself. When you do that process of working towards healing our society, you're also healing yourself, because it's absolutely all connected on a very deep level. So whatever healing and love that you give to whatever you think is outside yourself is actually healing and love that you are simultaneously giving to yourself and to whatever is perceived to be, outside of your own physical body. So if you give to the water, you give to yourself. If you give to the soil, you give to yourself. You give to the plants, you give to yourself. If you give to the animals, you give to yourself. If you give to other people, you give to yourself. And take time to give to yourself as well. Take that time for the spiritual self-care and the community care. It's all very, very connected, and you'll see the beauty of it as you practice it.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we will end this episode of Resurrection, Spiritual and Social Renewal, and we will catch you next time. Assalamu alaikum.